Hello, I am Jennifer Lynn Purcell, aka Ever-Tuning Butterfly, bringing to you Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge, where we will discuss the challenges and triumphs of those with NLD. I don't know if you're a new listener or not, but I would like to share with you where I get most of my articles for this podcast. I've recently learned about a nonprofit that I would really like to help. It's the NVLD Project. In addition to doing research on NVLD and working to get it back on the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that is the DSM, they provide support groups for those with NVLD. You can find the NVLD Project at www.nvld.org. All proceeds from this podcast and the ads will go towards the NVLD Project. I will include the link for this in the description of the podcast. Please go to livingwithnld.com to learn more about my podcast. Also, I would like to announce that I now have created a YouTube channel for this podcast. I will post the link for this in the description for you. Today we will discuss how common NLD is, the symptoms of it, and how it is diagnosed. NLD is as common with girls as it is with boys. It can be diagnosed by your children's doctor asking them questions about their medical history, their symptoms, and having them examined. Or your child may need to go to a place that does tests for learning disabilities. This is exactly how I got diagnosed when I was 19 years old. The place I went to is called the Wright Institute, and they did several tests, including Whistler Adult Intelligence Scale, Whistler Memory Scale, and Woodcock-Johnson Tests of Achievement. If you are interested in knowing the names of the other tests I took, please don't hesitate to ask me via email. My email is livingwithnld@gmail.com. It was fun taking the tests because they weren't like any other academic ones. I was always wondering how I did on them and what they would tell me about myself. I had the testing done because for quite some time, I had a personal hunch that I was different from the rest of my family. It took many weeks to take the test but it was worth it because I got some accommodations that made college easier. The accommodations were being able to have audio versions of textbooks, being able to record classes, use a calculator on math tests to check my mental math, being able to have an index card with mathematical formulas on it as a cheat sheet during exams, and being able to take exams in a room by myself with more time. I also was able to have my emotional support dog with me if I wanted to when I was taking exams, which helped because I was able to pet her when I was kind of stressed out on trying to figure out what the answer was to a specific question. I always found it difficult to memorize formulas. That's why that index card was helpful. And also, after my mom started helping me with editing my essays in my sociology class, I started to see my grades increase from C's to B's and eventually to A's. Thanks, Mom. My grades in my environmental classes also rose from the accommodations. I was also allowed to bring my emotional support dog, like I said, to my tests because she was there for supporting me. And I would like to share with you some experts from an article from the NVLD Project's blog. The article is titled, "Could Your Student Have NVLD?" by Susan McCurry, I think that's how you pronounce her last name, and Elisa Perfecto. Susan has a MSED, BCET, and Lisa has a PhD. Quote, "Maybe you're surveying your class and notice one of your students, a boy or a girl, staring off into space, seeming to sit alone, though surrounded by others. They are not quite up on the conversations swirling around them, and perhaps you notice that they drop things, bump into people or objects. For sure, you've noticed that they have trouble with math. It isn't so much that they can't memorize facts, which is hard for them, but you've noticed that they can't tell what pattern of problem they're dealing with, no matter how you try to break down the steps to recognizing and solving one. These students may be part of 3 or 4% of the population that have nonverbal learning disabilities, or NVLD. You may be unsure that such a diagnosis exists. The student may have the label of ADHD, but you notice that isn't quite attention that goes wrong. It's also organization. It's also knowing what to pay attention to on a map, graph, or even in a book. They can be frustrated by having to make inferences. They are detailed people. Their memories are fine, and their verbal skills are years beyond grade level, but they just can't get their work done well enough. They test okay. Anything in multiple choice format should suit them, but ask them to produce an essay on a theme and they fall apart, unless the task requires less analysis and more summary of details. Their friendships can be limited by difficulty in following conversational jokes and in knowing how to respond to friendly overtures from others, end quote. So thank you to Susan and Lisa for that explanation to teachers and others who think that they are observing someone with NLD, or that they know somebody who has NVLD, but don't know what it is because they never have heard of it. Or they may have heard of it or something similar to it, but they don't know what NVLD is because it's not on the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Susan and Alicia are one of those that is trying to support people with NVLD by speaking up for them, by saying it's not their fault that they can't do the things that the academic life is asking them to do because their brain is wired differently. They also provide really good tips for teachers on how to help students who have NVLD. If you want to check them out, I will provide the link for you in the podcast description to the article. I will also highlight a few here. Quote, be their companion. NVLD can make school seem like a nightmare for some students, even though they can be very smart. Make sure that your NVLD student knows that you are a companion of his or her success and commit to being the teacher that your student needs today. Also get educated. The more you know about NVLD and how to recognize it, the more you can use your pedagogical expertise and creativity to help your NVLD students become successful. Realizing that your student is exhibiting characteristics of NVLD and not trying hard enough should help you to understand the types of differentiation, classroom strategies, and learning supports that each individual student needs. Be specific and explicit. It is important not to assume that NVLD students can apply directions from one classroom scenario onto a different situation. Remember that NVLD students have difficulty approaching new situations and difficulty recognizing patterns. Explicitly teach the directions that you want your students to carry over to different situations over time. They need lots of practice to be able to do this, end quote. These are really good tips because people with NVLD do need more help because of having a learning challenge. I remember when my parents or tutors would give me extra help that I needed, I really appreciated it because it made it so much easier for me to do well in my academic life. That's probably why I was a straight A student, at least in high school. Like I said, in college, wasn't straight A's because I didn't have accommodations at the very beginning, but I was able to raise those grades once I got the accommodations. And I would say that also with the tips, it's like Susan and Lisa were saying, it's good to know that it's not that your student isn't trying. Believe me, they are trying. They just probably aren't quite getting it because, if it's math, I know for me, I have a slower calculating speed, so it takes me longer to calculate a math problem in my head or on paper. So it just takes longer for me. And I'm sure that's true for other people who have NLD or NVLD, same thing. So, be patient with them. And that's probably going to be a lot of patience, and be able to know that sometimes they'll get it one day and then the next day they may not remember anything you taught them, and you're going to have to be patient and realize, okay, deep breath, let's go back through this. And maybe you will have to re-explain maybe not everything, but basically everything that you just did the day before. But maybe they'll get it even better because you're going back through it. And maybe you're going to explain it even better than you did the day before because you're going back through it. So if you want more resources, please go to my website for the podcast. I will provide you with a link to it in the description of this episode. I do have some good resources on there for you from the NBLD project and from other sites. So in conclusion, I would like to hear from my audience. If you know individuals with NBLD I could interview for this podcast, please email me. What are you interested in learning about NBLD? I know I'm not an expert, but I do know I have the living experience of having it. I would like you to practice journaling about your gifts and differences. Also see if there is a way that you can make that difference become easier for you to do than it originally was. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed learning something new today. See you next time on Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge, and talk to you next Friday. Bye. As I wrap up, there are some things I would like to share with you. I do have a website for this podcast. It is called livingwithnld.com. I also have a Facebook and Instagram page for this podcast. It is called Living with NLD. I will include the links for those in the description. In conclusion, I would like to hear from my audience. If you know individuals with NLD that I could interview for this podcast, please email me at livingwithnld@gmail.com. What are you interested in learning about NLD? I know I'm not an expert, but I do know I have the living experience of having it. I would like you to practice journaling about your gifts and differences. Also see if there is a way that you can make that difference become easier for you to do than it originally was. Thank you for listening today, and please go to my YouTube channel and subscribe to it. Thank you. Bye.